the only government that has used atomic weapons against people, incinerating 2 whole cities. And we have a leadership in our government that wants more power to destroy, that increases constantly our military commitment, all in the service, of course, of corporate wealth, and is a clear and present danger to the planet. I'll point out that the first 8 of the 19 charges deal specifically with Iraq. The remaining 11 deal generally with Iraq, but deal with the larger world community itself. The first charge, we say it so often that we fail to grasp its real meaning, is the waging of a war of aggression. I witnessed the Nuremberg trials briefly as an 18-year-old Marine. That court held that the war of aggression is the supreme international crime. After World War II, it'd be pretty easy to think that. This assault on Iraq is beyond question a war of aggression. Everyone calls it a war of choice. But international law defines a war of aggression as an attack on another nation that is not an immediate threat to your physical safety and that of your people. And no one could possibly believe that Iraq, after 12 years of the harshest sanctions in history, and they want to tell us that was good for people? 1.5 million killed in a very cruel way. To watch your child or your grandmother wither away from hunger and malnutrition and lack of medication and bad water that can take an infant out in a day is not a happy life. And the assault of these sanctions, which are really a symbol of the treatment that U.S. foreign policy imposes on the poor everywhere, just not so radically. The same work as the trade agreements like NAFTA, the banking of the international public and private banks, and the exploitation of the labor and the resources of any country that has them, that are desirable. The second, third, and fourth counts of the indictment deal with the criminal ways in which we waged a war of aggression. Excessive force. It was in terrorem war, even labeled as such. Shock and awe. What does that mean? But to terrorize a people and kill them at the same time. You think nobody got hurt? Thousands and thousands of civilians died. We always like to test new weapons. I've been to every place we've had a major military action since at least 1970. And nearly every place have seen the testing of new weapons, even little Panama. We found 4 new weapon systems tested there, because that's what generals love to do. Here we used new super bombs. We used cluster bombs that simply slice people to pieces in an area the size of a soccer field. We used depleted uranium. It's perhaps even more painful and certainly slower than the work of the sanctions. And you never know when it'll end. You never know if it will end. You only know that it's endangered an entire people. And how much did we learn from the Gulf War about depleted uranium? We've used more than 4 times the amount in the brief invasion of Iraq this time. We've glorified assassination. It's a particular form of murder. The president, and applauded from both sides of the aisle in his State of the Union message, and we should never forget it, announced our use of assassination and summary execution. You remember the famous words, we've captured 3,000, and many more have met a different fate. And in the best John Wayne tradition, let me put it this way, they won't be around to bother us anymore. What do you think those big bombs were for? We began the assault with a big bomb to assassinate Saddam Hussein and other leadership. Claimed for a while we got him, got his sons and got others. And we ended the war with a big bomb. This one outside of Baghdad, very close, really in the suburbs. Baghdad has suburbs. And we claimed we got him that time. And then we finally had to decide maybe we didn't. Or maybe we knew all along, who knows. Because the one thing you can be sure of, what this government tells you is, you don't know whether to believe it or not. The probability is that they're not telling you the truth, which makes government of the people impossible. I mean, your wife might as well have stood in bed. You are meaningless and useless in terms of government action and government decision-making. The 8th count ends the direct indictments of Iraq, and it's the continuing criminal occupation of a sovereign state and its peoples, and the daily abuse of their fundamental rights, including their right to life, their right not to be permanently injured by gunfire. Every day during this occupation, Iraqis die from U.S. military violence. We have to end that. The remaining counts, up to 19, broaden the scope of the charges. And while each includes conduct that applied to the war on Iraq, the continuing war on Iraq, they really show the urgent need of the American people primarily, but reaching out to all the friends we can find in the whole wide world for help to end militarism in this country. The numbers of techniques and the outrageousness of them are counted in those 10 separate charges. And 19 tries to wrap it up by stating the purpose of all these criminal acts. And it's to dominate and control, and above all, to exploit people that have something we want or that won't do what we say. With Iraq, we enrich the Halliburtons of our corporate culture. We reap profits from the oil under the soil of the cradle of civilization. And when we got there, we intended to stay for a long, long time, as long as there was oil and anything else in our interest, including global military domination. The Iraqis have a different idea about that, and they've got, I believe, more determination than we do. We have to hope their struggle for their own independence and their own sovereignty, to free themselves from, it's been called a puppet government, but have you seen the resume of the head of government installed by the United States? An asset of the CIA for decades. I mean, can you get more audacious than that? A man who organized and caused violent acts that we define as terrorist within Iraq in the 1990s that included, we now know, movie theaters, school buses, places that people eat in public. A common terrorist, George Bush would say, if he spoke the truth, but he speaks with a forked tongue. Every crime charged here is a high crime or misdemeanor under the Constitution of the United States. And we must demand of the Congress that it do its duty and impeach George W. Bush and the other indicted officials. And then we have to redouble our effort. Energy is genius. That's where it comes from labor, from hard work, to build a movement in this country that will rein in this rogue elephant government that we have before it tramples the poor of the earth, here and abroad, into dust. And we need to join with all of our friends everywhere in an international effort to end the militarism and exploitation of the peoples of the earth by the United States government. So let's pull up our socks and march and sing